Oh, I miss a day, and all of a sudden we get a detailed medical examination of aliens. Get in here, this is Jack with Cosmic Road. I talk about UFOs and the paranormal. Please hit like, please subscribe, share on social media, and let me know what you think in the comments below. Alright, yeah, just in case anybody was wondering, I'm fine. Sorry I missed yesterday. I'm gluten intolerant and I accidentally got some gluten the day before. And I went to my favorite Mexican restaurant. I got a meal that I've had before, but evidently I'm more sensitive now, and the little bit of wheat flour that was in the sauce triggered me. So I'm not going to get that meal anymore, but it sucks that I'm getting more sensitive to that stuff. Yeah, I didn't get much sleep that night, and yesterday was an unpleasant day, and I'm still recovering today, but feeling good, more or less. So, okay, let's get into it. This is from Reddit. We have a supposed molecular biologist who was brought into the program and was given aliens to study. And, you know, we're talking genetics and everything. I mean, this is a detailed medical examination of non-humans. This is crazy. And some really credible people have come out supporting this, or at least saying, you know, hey, we're scientists, we're molecular biologists, and we've read this, and we're not saying this is legit, but we are saying that this guy knows some stuff. He is not, I mean, he is a real scientist, and he is speaking as a scientist. Well, my wife is a molecular biologist, and her actual job title is senior scientist. I actually forwarded her this article a couple of days ago when it first broke, or when I first saw it, to get her opinion on it, and she still hasn't taken a look at it. She is not that interested in aliens, unfortunately. But yeah, I know, right? But anyway, but other scientists have taken a look at it and have positive things to say in support of the science involved and the know-how of the author, which is not to say the contents are legit, but it's intriguing. If it's, you know, yeah, so let's just get into it. So from the late 2000s to the mid 2010s, I worked as a molecular biologist for a national security contractor in a program to study exobiospheric organisms. I will share with you a lot of information on this subject. Feel free to ask questions or ask for clarification. It seems like all my comments are being deleted. I will post answer at the end of the message. And indeed, he does answer, or she. I'm going to say he just for simplicity. But yeah, he does work. He does answer a few questions at the end. From the late 2000s to the... I'm not going to read the whole article, by the way. From the late 2000s to the mid 2010s, I worked as a molecular biologist for a national security contractor in a program to study EBO. The aim of the program was to elucidate the genome and proteome basis of these organisms. Although the study of OBCs has been going on for decades in other programs, the new high-throughput DNA sequencing of the late 90s unblocked stagnant research in this area. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all his process. Yeah, he did. He went through the interview process. He calls them 3 increasingly suspicious interviews, each in a different location. But eventually he was brought into this thing, and the laboratory itself, he actually names the name and the location of the laboratory. I found that very interesting. So, yeah, I mean, we need to get somebody over there. Fort Detrick, Maryland. There's the name of the lab. I mean, if this was an anonymous, you know, BSer, I guess I should say, if this was a hoax, I tend to doubt that he would give a real location. So to me, that rings true. But, you know, I haven't been to that lab, so I don't know. It says, indeed, the lab containing EBO samples or derived cell cultures is whatever. So he actually gives the actual, you know, name of the room. So that's really interesting, and he goes into more detail. He says, it's obvious that these creatures have died as a result of major trauma. I've never witnessed a motorcycle accident fatality, but it probably looks similar to this. It is acknowledged that there are more EBOs carcasses at other locations. Well, of course there are. The cell culture laboratory, as its name suggests, is where cell lines derive from. I'm not going to go into all the science. Okay, let's go into the genetics. Their genetics are like ours, based on DNA. This fact was very puzzling. He goes through, he talks about how he thought aliens wouldn't have DNA. So, I'm not a scientist enough or at all to understand why non-humans wouldn't have DNA or why a scientist would not expect them to have DNA. But he talks about their junk DNA is different. He says in humans, the junk DNA, he calls it intergenic regions, represent approximately 99% of our genome. I'm aware that these sequences aren't completely useless. They can be used as histone anchors, as buffers to protect coding DNA from radiation, or even as alternative open reading frames, but it's rather peripheral. What's particularly striking about the EBO genome is the uniformity of these intergenic regions. We see the same sequences repeated everywhere, and the distance in BP between the genes is virtually the same throughout their genome. The result is a minimalist, highly condensed genome. In fact, it's much smaller than ours. So they have a smaller genome with a lot of uniformity. Interesting. And it goes on through the science. There's, various, he's got some really interesting stuff to say. A lot of it is very dry. I am going to link to the article. If you haven't had a chance to read it yet, I encourage you to do so. But it is pretty dry. I'm not going to go into all the science. I'm not a scientist. I'm a science fiction author. I like to make science up if I can. Or mainly I write fantasy, but in whatever science I have is more fantastic than scientific. But this struck me as interesting. No living thing in our biosphere has this kind of precise address in its genome. Once again, the presence of TPR cannot be explained by evolutionary pressure, but only by genetic engineering on a genomic scale. So these are created beings. These are not, they did not evolve naturally. They were, genetically engineered. This is what you get with the grays and the gray type species, is the idea that they are genetically engineered, that they are basically biological robots. He goes on to say, TBR opens the door to several possibilities. One of them suggests that EBO geneticists can insert or remove a gene from a cell in a way that is far more targeted and efficient than our technology allows. No proteins have been identified in the EBO genome that interacts with TPR. Rather, we believe that these proteins are exclusively targeted by external genetic engineering tools, probably used at the zygotic stage of embryonic development. Let's move on to gross anatomy. What do these things look like? How do they work? Gross anatomy. They are morphologically very similar to the gray aliens that are part of modern folklore. Their height is about 150 centimeters. They have 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head. Still, there are some notable differences. Skin, the gray skin that is often described in folklore, is in fact a biosynthetic film which likely serves to protect the EBO from a hostile environment. It doesn't provide effective protection against temperature changes, but it does offer adequate protection against the passage of liquids. It's possible that this film confers other advantages, but my knowledge on this subject is limited. Under the gray film, the epidermis is rather white, and the texture is very regular without any hair. We do not see any defect other than the folds near the joints. This is described as greasy in one report, but that's not something I've observed. The same report states that a strong, lingering smell of burnt hair and ammonia is present when the film is removed. There are a lot of pores on the skin, crossing from the epidermis to a gland in the hypodermis. These glands and pores are the terminal point of the excretory sudoriferous system. I'm sure I said that right. Which would explain the previously mentioned smell. Head. The head contains 2 large, oversized eyes, 2 nostrils without protuberance, a narrow mouth without lips, and 2 ear canals without auricles. Okay, I'm sure I said that right too. There is a mandible, but the musculature is vestigial. There are no teeth or tongue in the oral cavity, which is interesting because I have come across a couple of abductee accounts that showed the beings, if they needed to intimidate someone, somebody was giving them pushback, they would open their mouth, revealing a series of teeth down their throat, like some sort of monstrous eel or, lamprey or something. So either that was a false image projected to intimidate people or a different species. I'm thinking more likely a false image, but that's interesting that they would do that, and that goes along with a lot of the screen memories and the projections that they seem to be able to do. The eyes. Like the skin, the eyes are covered with a semi-transparent biosynthetic film that offers the same environmental protection while providing protection against certain wavelengths and light intensity. When the film is removed, a more traditional eye is revealed. And this is also what you get in The Day After Roswell, the book by Colonel Philip J. Corso. He has a chapter devoted to the autopsy of one of the beings recovered from the Roswell crash. And it seems to be either a gray or a very similar type being. It seems a little different than the classic gray, whether that's a subspecies or simply some other being that evolved similarly or was engineered similarly. That was a similarly created being. That was a completely artificially created being. Its whole body was designed to interact with the ship that it was in. Even, I've talked about that before. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail now, but that is interesting that they seem to have the same sort of eyes. So I'm wondering if, because it had the lens over the eyes. So I'm wondering if this is the same, of the same race or the same sort of thing, the same sort of being as those Roswell beings from The Day After Roswell. The brain is tetraspheric, composed of 4 major sections. The sections are separated by transverse and longitudinal fissures and are connected to the central lobe, which acts as a brainstem and cerebellum. The volume of the brain is around 20% superior to that of a man of the same height. And I want to say that if I'm remembering right, and correct me if I'm wrong, if your memory is better than mine, but I think that in The Day After Roswell, the autopsy of the being also said it had 4 major sections instead of our 2. So I'm again wondering if this is the same being or the same, from that same crash or a similar crash from the same race. The neck is proportionally longer than that of a human and at the same time relatively thin. As mentioned, the esophagus and trachea are separate. There are no vocal cords in this region. Interesting, because occasionally in the lore you do get them speaking with words. Almost universally, it's telepathic communication, but every now and then you do get this verbal communication with their mouths. So, is that a mental projection? Are they, just letting people think that they are speaking with their mouths? I don't know. There is no navel. The pelvic bones are apparent. There are no genitals or anus. And that's interesting because often you get experiencers and contactees who will report that there are distinctly male or female beings among the grays that they are interacting with. Is that a different subspecies? Is that one of the higher grays? Because there's the small grays and there's the tall grays and there's a whole bunch of varieties of grays and gray type beings. So it's really kind of hard to know exactly what we're dealing with here. Anyway, it goes on talking about their blood and, the digestive system, etc. It's a really interesting read. And then he answers a few questions at the end. Question 1, amazing story. Have you shared this with the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence or with Arrow? And do you have evidence to back this up? Answer, thank you. No, I haven't, and no, I won't. It sounds like a honey trap to me. Now that's really interesting because I've often said that Sean Kirkpatrick is the fox guarding the henhouse, and this would bear that out. He goes on to say, I will not place my life in the hands of politicians. I have no proof other than this message. I know it's not much, but it's what I'm prepared to offer. Okay, well, thank you for your testimony. I appreciate this. Question 2, well, that was a read. So they are bioengineered worker bees. Any elemental components that are unitributable to our biome. I'd never heard of unitributable, but okay. Answer, yes. Knowing that they're disposable, unable to live independently without technological support, and that they're ephemeral. The only suitable hypothesis is that they are alive only to accomplish their task, and that is what you get in a lot of the lore. They are worker bees. They are drones. They are bred to carry out these abductions. That is what they are designed to do. Can you clarify your question about elemental components? He's asking the questioner. Can you clarify your question? And he goes on to say, EBOs believe, the question is, because he has, the scientist has seen some briefing material talking about the being's religion. I thought this was interesting. And the response is the EBOs believe that the soul is not an extension of the individual, but rather a fundamental characteristic of nature that expresses itself as a field, not unlike gravity. In the presence of life, this field acquires complexity, resulting in negative entropy, if that makes sense. This gain in complexity is directly correlated with the concentration of living organisms in a given location. With time and with the right conditions, life in turn becomes more complex until the appearance of sentient life. After reaching this threshold, the field begins to express itself through these sentient beings, forming what we call the soul. Through their life experiences, sentient beings will in turn influence the field in a sort of positive feedback loop. This in turn further accelerates the complexity of the field. Eventually, when the field reaches a critical mass, there will be a sort of apotheosis. It's not clear what this means in practical terms, but this quest for apotheosis, I'm saying that wrong, seems to be the EBO's main motivation. What? So the word that I'm not saying correctly is their main motivation. Now they're talking about the field reaching a certain complexity. Are they talking about the planet? Okay, right? Because that's like in a lot of the lore, or the woo-woo stuff, is the idea that Gaia, the planet, wants to reach the fifth dimension or achieve the fifth dimension. And it's going to get there whether we come along for the ride or not. And that's what you get in like the Barbara Lamb and Dolores Cannon material. And a lot of the other stuff dovetails with that very nicely. The beings will say stuff like that from time to time. So that seems to be kind of what he's getting at here. I don't know. I mean, if they're getting this information from some sort of live being that they've interrogated or interacted with peacefully, can you trust what the beings say? I don't think you can trust what the beings say, but that is really, really intriguing. So, yeah. Now, I don't know what to think about that, but if that's true, then the beings are here. If I'm interpreting this correctly, then the beings are here to help Gaia assist Gaia in her transition to the fifth dimension. Yes, we are living in the age of Aquarius, and the shift is coming. The fifth dimension is coming. The rapture is coming, whatever you want to call it. And they are here to help in that process, if I am understanding this correctly. And I very well may not. Let me know what you think in the comments below. So, and that's about it. I mean, he goes into a lot more detail. You read all this at your leisure. I did want to end on this interesting note. The Chat GPT-4 did an analysis of this Reddit post. So and this is probably a lot more digestible and less dry than the actual post. The skin, the biosynthetic film, is an interesting feature, and while it is described as potentially protective, it might also have a sensory or communicative function. The absence of hair might imply a lack of need for such an adaptation. So that's an interesting take by ChatGPT, but the whole idea of these things is that they are not adapted, they are created. So I don't quite understand why ChatGPT would have made that mistake. I guess that shows the limitations so far of this technology, or maybe that's disinfo. But yeah, so they are not adapted, and I just wanted to point that out. Head, eye, and ear, the oversized eyes suggest a possible nocturnal or low light lifestyle, although the semi-opaque film complicates this interpretation. But again, they did not evolve like this. They were created. So anyway, it goes on, but it is funny. It is funny. So I'll post the link to the ChatGPT analysis, but I did want to end with that. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I think this is fascinating. If it's a hoax, it's a very detailed, very well thought out hoax. It's giving the names of certain places. It gives the name of the building, and it gives the actual specific room location of the lab. It goes into a lot of scientific detail that other scientists have said rings true. It also dovetails very nicely with the Day After Roswell chapter on the autopsy, as well as some of the other material that's out there. So I'm inclined to think this is probably on the level, but let me know what you think. And I wouldn't say I'm like 100% on this, but I'm like on the fence, leaning toward this being real. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. And if you've enjoyed this video, please give me a big thumbs up. I sure would appreciate it. Smash the subscribe button and the bell to be notified of future videos. Join me on social media. There's Facebook and Twitter links below. And if you wanted to share this video on social media, that would be super helpful. There's plenty of other videos to check out on the channel. And until next time, this is Jack with Cosmic Road signing out.